Right, this is going to be another episode of the Best Damn League Show. Number 9, we're obviously past the regular split. If you remember on the last episode, we did sort of our review of the regular split. We lightly previewed the playoffs, but we didn't go as super in depth as we will now because we knew it was weeks and weeks away from happening. And there was so much good change, including, by the way, the patch, which we'll get to in a minute. But one thing I wanted to start out with is, obviously, one of the things people love about the LEC is the shoulder content and the whole like different tone and direction of the broadcast. And for this actual playoffs, they did a skit, which is a full-on, properly produced skit with like backgrounds and everything, the whole script. Clearly, like, they put a lot of time into this. And it's basically an homage to the classic American kids TV show called Mr. Rogers' in the Neighborhood. And so here's the funny thing, though. We're going to get to our thoughts in a second, but I wanted to just actually initially get Dom's thought, because Dom actually is an American. I wondered, like, when you see this reference, do you know what they're referring to? What do you think of the skit?
Very, very vaguely. I mean, I've heard of Mr. Rogers in the Neighborhood, but this is like a show that was on, I believe it like debuted in the 60s or the 70s or something like that. So, you know, I was a little bit too young for that at that point. Maybe I was like 1 or 2 years old back in like 1968. So, you know, I didn't get to fully interpret, you know, how good Mr. Rogers really was. But for me, it just seemed it seemed a little out of place that Goldberg was the one that was doing it. When I see that type of skit, I just think Dracos immediately. That just seems like such a Draco skit, and he's the one that would make it. But I think it's really strange because, like, to me, I watch it, I'm like, okay, this is whatever. And then you look at all the comments, and people were
they loving it,
madly in love with it. They love that piece of content. So I mean, I feel like LEC is now at the point where they can literally just do anything, and it's going to be well received. Like, they can make a rap song, like they can do stuff that's intentionally cringe, intentionally not cringe. Like, it doesn't matter what they do. Their audience loves LEC so much that they can actually just come up with anything, record it, put it on the LEC channel, and it's going to do well.
Here's the analogy I'd give you, dude. It's like, do you remember when G2 was in its prime and they were like the top team in Europe, and obviously they had that famous banter style of marketing? And obviously people will know, because it kind of became synonymous with LEC in general, Fnatic's org started trying to do the same thing. And if you remember, they always just got slammed, because the problem is, because Fnatic's org doesn't give the same vibe, even if they were doing the same joke, it did feel cringing compared to, you know, the G2 ones, like, they're just swagging on them, haha, hilarious. So I kind of feel like I agree with you. The joke is, the LCS is sort of between a hard and a rock play, and between a hard place and a rock, as we say in English. Because the problem is, Dom, if they don't do anything LEC style that's fun, then they're boring and they're stuck in the past. But if they do, if they ever slightly miss the mark, they're just going to be called cringe. Even though I'm with you, mate. Some of the things they do on LEC definitely very, very cringe. It's kind of the gamble you take when you put yourself out there, and especially if you try to do something funny. If a joke doesn't land, that's the worst thing ever, of course. So here's my problem with this actual piece of content, Dom. The actual production and the raw execution of it is very good. Like, clearly they've put mad amounts of hours into those fucking, the background, you can tell they've like fucking paced out like the timing of when he speaks to fit the song and the movement. That's all great, right? There's a lot of technical aspects I'm actually very impressed with, and they've clearly, like, whoever did it knew what they were doing. But I'm with you on the Goldberg thing. Like, he just doesn't have the charisma, in my opinion, to pull that role off. And what you said about it being Dracos, here's the weirdest part about this to me, Dom, and no one's commented on this. The reason why I even feel like this idea, I would suspect, is from Dracos, or definitely it's from an American, is because here's the craziest thing about this particular concept, Dom. Everyone's acting like it's just fine, like they know this concept, right? It's true. I think a couple of years ago, they did on like Netflix make a documentary about this guy, Mr. Rogers. But all you need to know is this, Dom. I looked up like the time period, like you're saying, when this show came out. And basically, my generation actually was like the last that used to have this show like regularly every year in theory. But I'd never heard of it, Dom, because it never was in England. Like, this is an American show only. And the craziest part is, it isn't actually something beyond this like documentary a few years ago that like is super famous outside the world. And this is why it's weird. Because if people don't know, Sesame Street is super famous, dude. I actually did have Sesame Street when I was a kid. That would be on in like really early morning, even though it's an American show. So by the way, I don't have any problem with that at all. You can do an obscure reference. I just thought it was a bit of a weird one, because it's like, this is more like for the LCS, isn't it? Fuck, does anyone in LEC know Mr. Rogers is?
I mean, American. We don't like, as an American, no one knew this shit. Like, most of the people that you know I grew up with, and I'm definitely one of the older people that's in like the LCS generation or whatever. Would be like Blue's Clues or Sesame Street or something like that. Those would be the shows that we would have more of a reference to. Yes. So yeah, I mean, it was something that I even had to like look up. I'm like, oh, I think this is like, it wasn't even something where I looked at the set. I'm like, Mr. Rogers. Right. I think
Right.
I've seen something like this, and I don't even know if I've actually seen Mr. Rogers or I've just seen parodies of Mr. Rogers in the same thing.
Episode or something.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll
And
be
I just
something
like
like
made the
that, yeah.
comparison. So the
Yeah.
first thing I did is I was like, what the like what is Mr. Rogers? And I just looked on Wikipedia and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, now I kind of kind of vaguely remember hearing of something like that, or maybe my parents told me something about like, oh, Mr. Rogers in the neighborhood. But I mean, I guess they can do anything and it still works out. Like people just like it. And yeah, I completely agree with the LCS point. LCS, it's like the problem is that LCS for so long hasn't felt fun that now when they're trying to make it fun, it feels very like engineered. It feels very contrived almost, where it feels like they're like, look at how fun we're trying to be, or look at how obscure we're trying to be. And for people, it just seems so like unnatural to what the LCS is that it just doesn't land with them. Like it's going to take a complete reconstruction. And honestly, I think it just needs like different faces on it. It needs new people, because the people that are already there have already been put into a box by the viewers that I don't think they can get out of easily. So they just need, like, if they're going to do things, I think that they need to bring back like some of the people that are really popular with the LCS audience. Like they got to have like Double doing something, and like Meteos and Sneaky and the people that are beloved within the LCS community. They need to have them incorporated into the content in some way, and it probably will cost money to do this, but that's what I think could actually revive the hype around the content, the shoulder content of the LCS.
Yeah, for me, unfortunately, I'm with you on that one. The problem LCS has is this, right? When LEC tries something funny, even if it doesn't land, because they're doing it all the time, the vibe's sort of like, oh, whatever, they're trying stuff. If LCS does it, it always feels like they're trying too hard. Like they do have that, like, hey, fellow kids, they have that energy, unfortunately, when they try and do it, because they're just like telegraphing too much. Like, we're trying to be cool. This is a skit now. It's like, you have to make it sort of seem offhanded as though it's just a fun thing that pops up. The other thing I want to say was this, like, even though, by the way, I can even guess and reverse engineer why they've actually done this segment. Like I said, first of all, it's an American and they've thought of obviously something that culturally to them melts something. But also the premise of it is, right, I didn't watch that show, but I looked this up. Supposedly that's also like a theme of that show, because it's like a kid's show. It's supposed to be like wholesome, educational. Supposedly that guy's whole shtick is sort of like the idea that everyone's special and everyone's like unique in their own way. So what they've really done is this, Dom, because coming into the playoffs, like in their own way, there's no true favourite, as we've discussed in many of the last episodes, and how like everyone has a narrative where they could fail or succeed, and it's a bit all up in the air. They've obviously gone with the angle of, in theory, all the teams in the playoffs are good, and they've taken that angle and run with it. That's why I can see that that's like the kernel of where they've reverse engineered the rest of the episode, which isn't a terrible theme. But my only issue, and the reason I bring it up, is they also did like a little short promo for the playoffs, right? Dude, it's nothing. It's just like a guy in like fucking, like, I don't even know, editing software, in some editing software showing off like light camera skills. All it does on this promo that they did is it just shows each team logo, and then it says like Fnatic, and then it'll just have like a Dracos quote of him going like, oh, they're going to win the team fight after all. And that's it, dude. Like it shows like Hillsong, like Fnatic, and then it goes to the next team. What's weird about that to me is like, dude, you had all these playoff storylines you could put in. Like that intro should be like this, like Vitality, they were supposed to be the super team, Perks, the return of the king, but will they go out in last place? Like that's how you fucking set that up. Rogue just completed another excellent dominating regular split, but will their playoff demons rise? That's what you do. Those are the storylines you want to give me, dude. You want to hit me with those ones to start with, because actually I think they've actually accomplished the opposite now. They're trying to make it, Dom, that it's like, watch the playoffs because all these teams could just go off and it's going to be epic, right? But actually if you do that, in a way you make it less hype, you know what I mean? Like I need to feel like there are distinct storylines, and like for example, they aren't the same stakes. Like the stakes actually for someone like Vitality are totally different to XL. If XL loses this first match, they still had an all right split. Vitality comes 6th place. You can't escape like the totality of what that means for your org and all these fucking players. Like, to me, I think it's a bit whack to be like, and they're all just good teams. It's like, not really. Come on, man. Come on.
Yeah, there's teams that are happy to be there. Definitely. Like
Absolutely.
Misfits and XL could lose every single series that they play in playoffs, and it's still a successful season.
Yes.
Whereas like, I think for Vitality to be even deemed like semi-successful, they need to at least place 3rd. Like, I think that you could rationalize it being like a 3rd place under Rogue and Fnatic and be like, yeah, Fnatic is just better, and Rogue, had a very surprising season, and Vitality just doesn't have the ability to potentially lose a game because they're coming from the losers bracket and all that stuff. So I could see that angle working, but just in general, like Vitality like has to win a few series to actually come close to what the hype was, because the hype was that this team is a super team, right? Like they should be first or second. So like maybe you could negotiate your way into third place, but you can't go any lower than that, which is obviously different than the stakes for other teams. I mean, even Rogue doesn't have those stakes really. Like it's not like many people believed in Rogue after Inspired and Hansama got bought out by NA. People thought that, oh, Rogue is probably going to be like a third, fourth place. Like I didn't see anyone having them top 2 originally. So they pretty much can do no wrong as long as they win the first series, which I'm pretty sure they should against Misfits. So we'll see.
One thing I thought we'd do then, before we get into the playoff matchups, is I wanted to get some of your thoughts. We can be as brief for as long as you want, depending on how interested in the all LEC teams, Dom. Because look, I will say I am famous for complaining about almost every one of these, because unfortunately, since they publish who did what votes, you can always find some that are like, why the fuck is this person not having, like, I mean, there was an obvious example. I'll use this one since she actually apologized and said it was a mistake. So, for example, Shox didn't actually have Vethio anywhere on her top 3 mids. Now, she says she just forgot to put him on. Like, it's one of those ones where maybe in her brain, like, she thought she'd put him already and then she's put Larson, Humanoid, and the rest of it, right? But obviously, that's very shocking because, look, as much as there's many debatable opinions, I think you'd be hard-pressed to say Vethio wasn't top 3 mid laner. Like, that seems a bit egregious. But that's the extreme example. There's plenty of other people, and this is the crazy one to me, Dom. Half the fucking talent had Humanoid as their number 1 mid laner. I don't know if you saw this. Like, people like Drake, they all had that as number 1. And the joke is Law didn't, but she's French. And they're all mad biased to the French players. So I don't even know if that means she would have escaped. Like, I wonder if it was a non-French player she'd have been in with. So I just wanted to get your take on this. What do you think, Dom? Because on the one hand, I have an issue, right, which is generally on talk shows, because I like to always facilitate the conversation. I don't like to shut conversations down. I'm not a fan when our mutual friend LS, he does have a trend where in this scenario, this is exactly where he would sort of just go, did you even watch the games? Like, they don't even know what they're talking, you can go too far. So I don't want to, like, castigate these people totally, but I'm sort of flabbergasted, Dom. I don't really understand, like, one, how that many people had Humanoid number 1. And then the other part is, like, you tell me, you check me if I'm off on this one. Am I just so biased towards Larson, dude, that I'm just in an alternate universe where I think Larson was the second best mid? Like, I don't get how everyone's so clear that Humanoid's above him unless they're going off he's a better playoff player or some narrative like that.
Or he's just a better player in their head. Like,
overall, if they believe, exactly. But I'm talking about specific to this split. I don't get these votes. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I think that if you are thinking about this split and the way so I think that it goes for a couple different things. I think one, you have to list what is your criteria to be all pro. Like, are you saying like all pro is more weighted towards the end or how good the player is? Or is it like every single game of the split is equal? Meaning if you like perform well in the first 9, that is exactly equal to if you perform well in the second round robin in the back 9. So I think that really matters, because if you're looking at the totality of the split, you have to have Vetio first and then Larson second and then Humanoid third. And I don't even think that any of these are even negotiable, because all the other players had too many rough, like Caps' first 9 games were too bad to put him top 3. In my mind, regardless of the fact that, he looks like he's coming into form again. Humanoid, probably by the end of the split, like if I'm going to watch just week 7 and week 8, and I'm going to be like, who's the best mid in LEC? Yeah, sure, I'll probably say Humanoid. That's and fine. If I'm going to say, who do I think is the best mid laner, like on a technical level, it's probably Humanoid. Like I think Humanoid will probably be the best mid laner in the playoffs, just based off his skill set. And, he has that vibe to him where it's like, you've seen him do it before. You know that he has the qualities to turn it on and become a champion. And this is somebody who was the best player in all of LEC in 2021. I think he was overall just the best LEC player for an entire year. But the way that I see All Pro is it's a regular season award based on solely the 18 games that they play. So that's why when I do those types of things, I'll always have like Vetio number 1, Larson number 2, Humanoid number 3, with Vetio being MVP, because that's what happened in these games. Like if you look at a player like Humanoid played on a fucking insanely stacked Fnatic with the person that most people have coming in second in MVP voting, Hillsong, and he only won 1 more game than Vetio on Misfits. And it's like, you look at how many games that Humanoid had to like overperform and hard carry compared to like how many games that Vetio had to do that, and it's
way
like,
less. Yeah, of course,
way less. It's not even comparable to how much Vetio had to carry on his team. So yeah, I mean, for me, I don't really view it as like All Pro's not a best player award, or it's not like coming into playoffs how I view them. It is purely how good the player was during each one of the games, and each one of those games is just 1/18th of what I am basing it off of. So For me, I can't really see how you can put Humanoid above Larson or Vetio. I think that, I mean, Larson was literally like almost flawless in the first 9 games.
Yeah, exactly.
And Vetio was almost flawless for like the entire split. So
Yes.
I can't really vibe with any of those other distinctions. But I mean, the question for me is like, is it for LEC voting, like, are all the people provided with like the same information as to like how they are supposed to, like, what their vote is supposed to mean? Or is it just one of those things where people just like they're like, oh, it's all pro, like put whoever you think is all pro?
Feels
And
like they
it's
just
kind
put names. Yeah, it doesn't feel to me like you get directed. You just get a vote slip and you put who you want. That's the vibe I get. You know.
yeah, which I think is like not necessarily what you want if you're actually going to like vote and you want people to like judge off the same things. Like if it is a regular split award, which is what it's always been, if it's a regular split award and it's based off the 18 games, and that should be said instead of it being like, oh no, you know what all pro is. Like, it's not who you think is the best, it's who did the best.
No, I'm with you totally. Like, first of all, on the humanoid point, dude, the reason I find this really egregious is because, as you say, like, assuming that we are treating all 18 games of the split as like equally meaningful, they all count, like, it's about performance and consistency and how many good games you have. I think it's egregious as fuck. Like, it's one thing if someone just said, look, I personally only really care about when it gets near to playoffs and, you know, like how you did in the last week. So if someone said that, yeah, that's a criteria where they could construct a world humanoid was better. All I'll say is this, guys. Humanoid, when he was having his worst games, Fnatic was winning all the matches. That was the beginning of the split when they were like that. Them and Rogue were the teams that were just winning all the games. Like, these were the games where he was looking mad ropey. So I agree. And except for in the latter weeks and the second half onwards, I don't get where this one's coming from at all. And then what I would absolutely say, by the way, along these lines is I think you've nailed it, right? What I want them to do is this. I want LEC to figure out what are these awards for? Because to me, the whole purpose of these awards, and I would do this, I would either have a little bit of text on the voting slip, or I would give like a little speech in front of everyone before they go away and do their slip. And I would say something to them like, the purpose of this award is to celebrate the best players only in this regular split across all the games they played. And in fact, I'd even add this as a context. Don't do it based on how good the team is. Just try and do it based on the player. Because that way, the cool thing about an award like this is, and this is the name I'm going to bring up now, this would have been a perfect chance with how ropey some of the junglers were to give Synkrov at least the 3rd spot. If he just got the 3rd spot, that would really be a brilliant way to show in history. But wait, he was on one of the worst teams, but he got the 3rd jungler. And it's like, yeah, because that's how good this guy was. Instead, dude, did you see this? Like, they had like fucking like Razork or something in there. Like, what? What? That's the same thing again. Like, that's just because he's on Fnatic. Like, what are we doing now if someone like Synkrov can't get a top 3 spot there? Like, what are we doing at this point in time?
There's other names that I think like could be considered for that spot. Like, I think Marcoon would be a very interesting person to throw in there. I think he had like pretty consistent performance.
Apologies, it was LEC they put 3rd actually.
Yeah, I can't really see LEC. I mean, LEC had so many weird games, but yeah, I mean, like Marcoon would have been an interesting name. Like for me, I would have had, like, if I'm going for based off just this split, I think Marcoon is a name I would have thrown in there. Like, even though Schlatten played a lot of Lee Sin, I mean, that can't be something that you're eliminating him on.
You're
like,
allowed to be good Lee Sin play. Yeah, of course.
If you're playing, like, if in your 18 games, you're playing 9 or 10 of them on Lee Sin and you're fucking smashing it on it, why not? I mean, Shadow did the same thing and he was awarded, I believe, 13
Agreed.
before. Yeah, and then the other person I would have was Synkrov. Like, I think that those would be the next 3 people in my mind. I mean, I think Razork played better towards the end, but I think his like first 9 games left a ton to be desired. I think there was a lot of things that could be desired, and I think Razork is probably somebody that I'm more critical on because I got pressed pretty hard by Veteran on my opinion. So I went through the games specifically, and I was like, no, he's actually just having like bad games. He's having bad games compared to what his level is, and Razork's an amazing player, you know. So I think that in general, like, he is somebody who I would think is a top 3 jungler. And like, I mean, I would probably say Elyoya is also a top 3 jungler. If I'm actually thinking to myself, who do I think are the best 3 junglers in LEC right now? I'll probably have, because I actually don't like, I think Malrong is somebody who needs to be top 3 because he was too good in some of the games. But like, in terms of skill level, with his playstyle and like the volatility that it creates, I don't actually think he's as good of a jungler as
Dom. If
Elyoya, Razork, or Jankos.
So here's the question. If I asked you, I think this is the question that you're talking about basically. If I said to you, make a team tomorrow, which jungler do you start with? Malrong's bottom of that list.
Yes, definitely. So I would probably have Jankos number 1. I would have Elyoya number 2 and Razork number 3. Those would be like my picks.
That's fair.
For but it's just like, that's not what happened in the split. Like, Elyoya had a bad split. He had a
Yes.
bad split, but he's a really good player. But that's
Yes.
just like, that is why you have these all pro votes. And that's one thing that I would put as a criteria for the vote, or I would put as like information on it, is like eliminate historical context from this vote. I think
Yes.
historical context should not be considered at all in this specific vote, because of the fact that, you know, you're doing a split all pro team. You're not doing a year all pro team or any of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll even say as well, along those lines, let me think. Yeah, that's exactly the way I think as well, mate. Like, the problem is, I even fall into it myself, but the difference is I sort of, like you say, I have my criteria set and I can drag myself back to it like a compass. Because I'll give you an example for me. If we're going to do the approach they're taking, which seems to be, if you're just on a team that makes playoffs and you historically were really good, they can sort of fudge your performance and just go, yeah, he's top 3. Well, by that logic, why is my boy Alfari on there then? Because if you actually watch the games, he didn't have that many good games, did he? Like, yes, historically he would be the best. Yes, his team is in the play. Like, you see my point? Like, it would be a stretch to have him like number fucking 2 or something, wouldn't it? Like,
I mean, I feel like if you're doing top lane, I don't even think you have many options. I think if you're doing like top lane, top 3, you have to have BB and LEC top 2, and you can reverse these orders. Like, you can be like LEC 1 or BB number 1, because what you do is you'd be like, oh, well, BB had to carry more games, like he had more standout performances, but Odo was more consistent. So like that could be preference, and I think either one, based on like what you view as a person, could be correct. So I think that is like, whatever order you have those 2 in, I think is completely acceptable, because they both were the best 2 top laners in LEC. And then I think the third one would have to be Wonder, based off his performance. I mean, he was so consistent, and he played like such like a solid weak side role for most of the split. I mean, he had like a couple bad games. He had like some games where he was like inting on a Akali or whatever. But I think overall, I think he has to be third. I think those have to be your top 3 based off the split. I don't see how you could throw Alfari. I mean, Alfari had some good games, but he had a lot of like weird games, and he had some like, I mean, he had some good laning, and then in those same games he would have some bad out of lane plays. So I just feel like Vitality, I mean, wasn't consistent enough to put any of their players top 3 this split. Like, there was just so many games where Vitality just looked terrible as a whole.
one thing I thought we'd do is, before we get into the matchups, just briefly, right? Obviously, no one can know how patches will affect things, but can you give me some thoughts? Like, what do you anticipate could be potential meta shifts for the playoffs, as opposed to what we saw at the end of the split? What would you anticipate would be the potential shifts, do you think?
Well, they're playing on 12.5B, so so I assume they're playing on 12.5B, because that's what LCS is already on. So normally they follow the same thing. So there's going to be a lot of AD changes in this this playoffs.
So we're not just getting like the Jinx spammed all over like it was before. What would be different now?
So I wonder if, so I think Jinx is still viable. I don't think it was hit that hard, but like the pick that we're seeing a lot in LCS is Kai'Sa. And I think Kai'Sa's really interesting to come back into the meta, because when Kai'Sa comes back, then that enables more AD mids, because you have essentially a bot laner that's going to be functioning as like an AP poke bot laner in the later portions of the game. So it gives you like a lot of like interesting things that you could potentially do. So like Lucian mid is something that I could see coming back, especially when you think about the players that are in LEC, right? Like Larson started spamming this. Humanoid is somebody who could definitely play the Lucian mid. Perks is somebody who plays the Lucian mid. So you have a lot of players coming in that can play that. So I think that that's an interesting dynamic, where now that Jinx and Aphelios are turned down, also Zeri is like 40% magic damage, which a lot of people don't really know, which means that like now you have 2 bot laners that are dealing more magic damage, which means that if you plug in like a half damage dealing jungler, or you do like a magic damage dealing top laner like Gwen or Akali, you can run 80 mids, and you can run Zeri or the Kai'Sa in the bot lane. So I think that that's some interesting things that we might see. I'm expecting to see a lot of Volibear in this playoffs. I just think that when like Xin was toned down a little bit, I think the Volibear will be really good, and I think it's really good for some of the junglers too. Like somebody like Jankos, for example, I think will thrive in a Volibear meta, because he's just so good at like covering lanes and knowing where to be on the map, and it's just his style of champion. So I think that would be a really interesting. But I think right off the top of my head, those are probably some of the meta changes I expect.
Okay, right. Let's talk about the teams then. We'll try and take that into account if that angle might play. So I'll segue immediately off that, Tom. The first thing I was thinking when you were saying that is, if we go into a meta that's more in the vein of a Volibear jungle pick, doesn't that immediately draw questions about how Malrang will hold up?
Not sure, because I feel like he likes to play that type of style where it's more okay to like sin on a volibear. Like your efficiency doesn't matter as much. You can play more for like every objective that spawns and like play around lanes, and you can skip camps. So I actually feel like this will still be fine for Marong. The time where I'll be worried about Marong is like in a full clear meta. If they like do something where they buff crab experience, or they buff golem experience, and suddenly it becomes like you need to full clear every fucking game, and we're suddenly in like the graves in Italy. That's when I'd start worrying about Marong, because it feels like he doesn't like farm. He will not farm. He'll sit in a bush where a lane's trying to get a push in, or he'll wait for a gank, or he'll wait for a counter gank, or he'll be topside and know there's a bot wave that could potentially be dove on, and run all the way from top to bot in order to execute this play. He's that type of player. So I think Volibear will actually fit well into what he wants to do. I think Hecarim is going to be banned most of this playoffs, I would assume. Maybe some people will let it through if they have a specific draft with strong lanes and they think they can invade early and really fuck up the Hecarim's pathing. But I'm expecting a lot of Hecarim bans in playoffs. And then when Hecarim is banned, and like, you know, I mean, there's going to be less Xin play, because Xin is just not as good as it was. Also, like, Goretrigger got changed and all this stuff. I'm expecting to see actually a lot of like these Volibear picks come up. And then from there, I mean, we have to see if anyone's willing to play some of the, you know, fringe picks. Like I don't know if we're gonna be able to see any of the things that LEC used to do. So one of the picks that I used to like was when Inspired, who's not obviously in LEC anymore, would play Fiddlesticks. I think that is actually really viable right now. I think Fiddle is in a really good place, especially into things like Lee Sin, and especially if you're able to play things like Lucian mid, so you could run comps like Lucian mid, Kai'Sa with a Fiddlesticks, and like a top laner that provides CC. I mean, I think that there's just some angles here that can be exploited, and I just wonder which junglers are going to, you know, try to break the meta, or which ones are just going to come in and kind of just play weaker versions of what was the meta during all of spring.
Okay, because I've got an announcement to make. And it's with I wouldn't say with trepidation. There's no trepidation when I say things, but I will say this could obviously blow up massively in my face. But I'm going to say it, right? I've really been thinking about this a lot. I was like discussing on Someone in Insight with Odo Am there, like the idea of them winning finally and all this. And I've realised I actually have decided I'm going to do what might be the mistake. I'm going all in on Rogue. I think Rogue will win. I actually think they will. Here's why. Because I think enough fundamentally is different from the past Rogue teams. Like, believe it or not, I know this might sound like haterism, but I actually, when I look at the way they play now and the way they played with Inspired, I think some of the issues they had were actually based around Inspired, which sounds fucked up because I do think he was the best player on the team, like role for role. But I just think that, like, if from seeing him in EG, which true might not be the fairest comparison, it's a totally drastically different type of a team, but I get the vibe like, I actually think you have to cater to him a lot as a jungler, mate. Like, I think I don't think he can be this smart, efficient jungler unless you basically just play totally to his style. He actually reminds me back in the day, I want to know what you thought of this analogy. He reminds me of early Meteos, where the premise was, if people don't know, the whole reason Meteos loved Hai as his mid laner is because Hai wasn't the mid laner who was ever like, you have to come and gank now. And if people don't know, the joke was, it's like Hai would just go and do the gank, wouldn't he? He'd just like fucking leave lane on Fizz and just do a dive top lane, and Meteos could just farm, and it's like he could choose when he wanted to gank. So to me, it's like I feel as though, like, to me, some of the like that like uncertainty, that like paralyzed feeling you had on Rogue. I'm not blaming Inspired, but I'm saying I think his style of play just meant that, like, I don't really know if you could have gone away from his style of play and like switched up what you were doing that much. So when you look at the team, they haven't really got many of the players left from the last team that fucked up. I think Trimby is way better, and that adds a quality they never had at support last year. Malrang, at least, by the way, even if you're in like that, what I like about players like that is, even though you don't know exactly how he's going to gank, it's predictable that they're going to make action happen. I sort of like that for the playoffs. And then I do think this is the split. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, and I'll take it on the chin. I think this is the split where Larsson's actually got it together, mate. I think he will actually be as good in the play. I'm all in. I am all in, exactly. Because here's why though, Dom. One, people forget, he actually had some pretty good games at Worlds. Like, he did have some games against top teams where he actually smurfed. And then two, just look at the split so far. Like you said earlier, mate, you would be hard pressed to find maybe there's 2 games in the split where Larsson was average, like bad. Like, he barely ever had any int games this split for me. So I feel like he's totally polished. The team looks great, and crucially, it's not just all on Rogue. We'll get to Fnatic in a minute, but I actually have some sort of questions about Fnatic that I think basically the gist is this. I'll give you a teaser. Unfortunately, I think a lot of why I thought Fnatic was going to work out is why I was certain Vitality would make the playoffs. It's like when you have that much talent, I just figure out eventually you're going to figure something out that worked. But even with that said, as good as Fnatic was at the end of the split, they didn't look like the great teams in history. Like this is going to be remembered as one of the better. They just looked like they got the synergies together and they were a quality team. But I don't think it's as clear cut. I know a lot of people are going to go with Fnatic, but essentially what I've realised is I was just being a bit lazy, reverting to the fact that Fnatic has all the names I expect to win. But when I actually look in the server, I think it's a lot more up in the air. I think Rogue can win. I'm not saying they're 100%, but I would say I'm taking them as my favourite. There's my controversial take.
Yeah, okay. So now I got to match you with my controversial take. So my controversial take is that I think that Vitality will actually get top 3. I think that they're going to battle through the gauntlet, which is something that I think everyone is just completely down on Vitality.
In theory, you have them beating XL,
G2 Misfits.
G2 Misfits. Yeah, okay. There we go.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the most controversial part is them actually beating G2. But when I look at their games, like I mean, I think that most so they're 2-0 versus Misfits, and I expect them to beat XL. Just I think that they'll outperform them in this type of series. But I think the G2 games, like when I look at the G2 games, so for example, the one that they played in the Super Week at the end, I believe is the one where Selfmade got invaded level 1. And I feel like as long as they're like not getting fucked in the jungle, I feel like their laners can actually compete. I mean, they're 1-1 with them. I think their other game was fine. And I think that Alphari I think that stylistically, Vitality matches up well into G2. But not only am I going to say that Vitality is actually like just going to be like top 3, because I feel like you could kind of get there anyway. I think that they'll actually look good in playoffs. Like I think that they'll like even when they lose to Fnatic or Rogue or whoever they end up playing in that second, third place match, I think that they'll actually look like a decent team. So my expectation is that Vitality will actually get somewhat of a playoff buff here. So we'll see. We'll see if I'm just like going to be a delusional Perks fanboy or whether there's actually some truth to this. But I mean, to be honest, I think the thing about Vitality that I'm looking for is, I mean, I want to see Liparov finally step. Look, if he doesn't step up in this playoffs, I don't know when this guy is stepping up, because he's doing the same thing that he always does. He's fucking like this guy is like 400 LP above the closest person in solo queue right now. Like he is rank 1 by a fucking mile. This guy is just like so down. I was looking through this guy looks like a completely different player. And then when I think about like this, I'm like, okay, so he's coming in his comfort zone with confidence. Hopefully they figured out that Karzi's just weak side and Kai'Sa's coming back into the meta. Karzi pick. Yeah, that's a Karzi pick. I think that Alphari is just still going to be able to pound for pound match up versus all these top laners in LEC. And yeah, I mean, I just believe in playoff perks. So I think that Vitality will like at least take a game off whoever they play in the second, third place match. And I think that they will narrowly lose that, but I actually believe that they're going to win the first 3 series they play. So
I do think that Misfits and XL are like flawed teams. I do think I have a very hard time seeing them go far in this playoffs. But my problem is the G2 series that you're talking about there. Because obviously, like, yeah, there's a world where you can beat XL. It'd be G2 you'd play next, assuming they lose, obviously, with the standings, right? My issue is, like, for example, if you play G2, the first place I have to go immediately, Dom, on the fucking roster is I've got Jankos and you've got fucking Selfmade. Like, listen, I think Selfmade has a lot of talent, but this has been one of those splits where, like, I've never felt as though he was as polarized as this split. Put aside, obviously, like in the past, yes, he had times where he carried. Like this time, it's felt very extreme though. Like it feels like, dude, this is why I have a problem with him in this playoff setting. This is why I'm going to bring it up. Jankos is the opposite to Selfmade in this regard. He's not going to have that many pop-off games, but his baseline level is so fucking excellent. And for the playoffs especially, I can rely on him. I know game to game he's going to reset. He's going to play well. The problem with Selfmade is I feel like he's a jungler who, and this isn't a great quality for a jungler, I feel like he's one where if he's behind, it's not looking good. If he's down in a game, mentally he can be out of it. Like I have more concerns essentially for where his head's going to be at in the series, not even just skill-wise. He clearly is a good player, but that can be a question mark for me.
He has won that one series, that one random series in the winners bracket against Yakos before, like in 2020, I believe. So
yes.
He has had that one experience, and that was definitely a different meta. I mean, that was like when Eve was a thing that people always had to watch out for. But I just feel like here he'll have advantages. Like I think that his bot lane, I mean, it's weird, right? Because G2's bot lane hasn't been good, but then Vitality's bot lane is going to be has been pretty much abysmal so far. I actually think that their bot lane will step up, and I think that if Vitality,
what do you mean?
Yeah, I think Selfmade's bot lane can step up. So when I look at the Jankos comparison, I think Jankos is definitely like got an edge and kind of has Selfmade's number, but I just don't think that Jankos is going to have that many tools. And I think the thing that is different about this G2 lineup is that you can't trust them with leads. Like when G2 has leads, they're the type of team that throws. And I feel like Vitality actually can win some of those games. I think Vitality is one of those teams that doesn't, like sometimes they just get beat fucking hard like early and then just get stomped. But I feel like if they can get past that, I think Vitality will actually be able to find angles to out macro and capitalize on some of the G2 flaws. Because when you think about G2 as a team, they're always the team that like will start a Baron that they shouldn't really start, or start a soul point that they shouldn't really start, and just get like aced in a team fight. And I feel like just in general, that is something that Perkz has always been super good at. Just like it's like a shark with blood in the water. Like he just sniffs that shit out. He's like, oh, they're inting this. Like go fucking hard right now. So I think that is like a huge advantage that they have in that series. And this is like, obviously, I'm just assuming that Vitality is actually going to beat Misfits or XL, and then I guess they would probably have to play G2 before the Misfits series, which would be interesting, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, the other thing as well that I will say I think goes to Vitality's favour in terms of the idea they're going to make some sort of a run is I also think, like, if you look just... Here's a factor I think a lot of people misunderstand, because I've seen a lot of coaches in LCS and a lot of players in LCS make this mistake, which is if they think of themselves as like, right, well, I'm the leader. Like, a classic mistake you can make is trying to give too many, like, epic speeches and fucking movie moments, you know? Like, you have to use those sparingly because you want them to really hit home, like, holy shit, like, this guy doesn't normally speak this way. So here's the thing. I don't think that Perkz in the first like 8 weeks of a split is going ham on his teammates. Maybe he's like telling them stuff like, you know, we got to get in the playoffs or we can't go 0-2. Yeah, that part he might be on them. But like the difference is when you come to the playoffs, that's where that guy's going to be at his best with his calls and his plays. And you are just going to follow him in the playoffs. If Perkz tells you to do something in a playoff match, you just do it. The difference is I get the vibe in the split. Like they did just look like they were just loading into the server and just playing the game out like lol, whatever, who cares, next. And then like it didn't seem like they were that like laser focused until quite frankly they were almost on the ring of elimination and they thought they might not make it. That's when they kind of like finally had to like get this shit together. So as much as Vitality has looked forward, I'd certainly expect them to look better. I mean I think it's hard to look worse, to be fair. Like yeah, I didn't even like the problem I had with them in the regular split, dude, was I don't really know where they had advantages. They're not like some mega early game team. They had fucking non-existent shit outside of lane. Team fighting was pretty good, I guess, if they got there with an even enough state. They have good players. Like the problem is they still, for me, I don't know what they think what style of play do you think they have?
What style of play do I think they have? Well, I think that they're going to just be benefactors of the meta shift in general. Like I think that is something that's going to be interesting. So I think that their roaming mid laners are going to be something that will eventually be a problem for teams. So I think that TF, even though TF is nerfed, I still think it's definitely viable. I think it's definitely playable. And you know, like TF Kais is a combo that is super valuable to have. So like I think that'll be something that'll generally be taken away from them. I mean, I just generally think Kaisa is going to be really good for Carzzy because it's something that you're not expected to win lane on and something you can play a little bit crazier on. And he always just had a knack for the champion. He was just better at that champion than some of the other ones. So I think that in like a Zeri, Kaisa, Ezreal meta, it's better to have Carzzy on your team than, you know, I mean, this is going to be, I guess, controversial, but somebody like Neon, who I feel like Neon thrives more in the Aphelios Jinx style meta,
yes,
which I don't think that we'll be seeing as much of in this playoffs. Also, I think that most teams are just going to ban the Jinx for Misfits. I think that this was a trap that teams fell into the whole split. And I think at this point, it's just like, don't let them have that AD carry. Like, let them play something that's not going to completely 1v9 the game if you throw once or you make like a mistake in a team fight. No other AD carry is going to put that amount of pressure on you in a team fight. So why let them have it? So I just feel like when they actually have the chance to prep, like if teams are prepping for full series against XL and Misfits, I feel like those teams drastically fall off. And I feel like G2 falls off a bit too, because G2's plan is pretty standard. I mean, they draft similarly. I mean, their bot lane is generally weak side, and then BB gets a counter pick, and they just try to play through him the entire time. But I don't know if he was going to have other counter picks that haven't been shown so far that are going to be as powerful. Like, I think Trend is just a broken champion that people aren't going to let him have anymore. I think the Akshan is like not as good as people have played.
That looks like a skill matchup for me. It's not just an OP champion.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like it's that strong. And I think if people are prepared for it and have a couple things that they're comfortable playing into it, I don't think that'll be as big of an issue for teams. And yeah, I mean, I just don't know if the rest of G2 is going to be like super solid. Like I'm really questioning how this bot lane is going to perform in the playoffs, because I felt like they're already starting to fall off in the regular season, and I mean, we have to see how they perform in a meta shift. But even if the meta shift generally will benefit somebody like Flockhead, I don't know if it'll benefit him as much as it would benefit Carzzy, for example. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe we'll be wrong, but that's I think Vitality is actually going to look pretty strong in this playoffs.
Let's just segue that into the Misfits convo, because I think one thing you've nailed there is the most disappointing part, if you're a fan of Misfits, is this. Look, yeah, sure, we can all get our popcorn and hope Vethio has some pop off games. I would imagine he's going to have at least one or two, and he'll get to have his moment where he's the MVP. He shows he's really good, but unfortunately, this is going to be one of those stories where it's like, shame his team isn't good enough, maybe in the future. Because I have to say, Dom, the cool thing, if you're a Misfits fan, was right towards the end of the split is when Neon had a bunch of these key games. Obviously, one of them was that game where they caught the massive throw and he team fought his way out of it. But the problem is, like you say, Jinx specifically was so OP if you were that type of team fight ADC that it's just an obvious ban. And if you do ban it, like you say, it's just Vethio you're dealing with at that point in time. And so I have to say, unfortunately, even though Misfits did this great job getting the 3rd seed, mate, bearing in mind, I think Vitality is going to beat XL. I don't think there's anyone they can beat in the playoffs. I think they can't win a series. And I'm not hating, like, it's just the situation they're in, unfortunately. And you add in, like you say, some of the meta swap stuff. I don't really know how they do it. In fact, even add that in itself, right? If everyone's playing shit like Volibear, what can Slatan do? Just do twice as good a game on Lee Sin? Like, fucking hell, you're asking a lot. And then add in this as well. Mate, Hirit got some games towards the end of the split. That guy still isn't constant. You can't rely on him. You can't rely on him to have 2 good games in a row, I don't think. So I actually think this Misfits team will be very bad in the playoffs, I have to say.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a fan. I think that they're very easy to prep for. I mean, I think that generally you just ban Lee Sin versus them every fucking game. You don't let Schlatten have it one time. And he just, like, his Xin didn't look good. Maybe he doesn't have to play that much Zen anymore. What is going to be another pick that he looks really good on? Maybe Hecarim. Like, maybe he could put in some Hecarim games, but I think that the people
you better get behind on that shit. I'll tell you that right now. Yeah. So that's like, you better get ahead in that fucking game.
Well, I mean, I think just in general, when you look at this team, the people that need to step up are Hirit and Mursa, and I just don't believe that they're going to step up to a level where this team can win series. And the problem is that, like, with the bracket, it's like, so their first game is against Rogue. And if G2 ends up losing to Fnatic, that means that their next game is against, like, the 4th team that just came off, like, a series win. So it's either G2, Vitality, or I guess XL, if XL somehow starts running the gauntlet, just beats G2 and Vitality. So if G2 loses that first match, it's so hard. I mean, they just don't get to play an easy team. They don't, like, maybe they could win a series if they played XL in the first round, but they just won't be able to play any of the teams that are actually exploitable. So I don't know. I just feel like Misfits is a flawed team. And when you think about their games, right, like, how many games did they just randomly come back in? Like, you have at least the Fnatic game and the G2 game. Those are, like, right off the top of your head. You're like, these were massive throws by the enemy team. So I mean, if you already take those away, okay, well, suddenly they're like, I mean, it's hard to do this for teams, but then they're like a 10-8 team. Like, if you take away those two games and they end up losing those games, then they look significantly worse, right? Like, they're...
And mate, that's with one of the hardest MVP fucking carry performances I've seen in years.
Yeah.
So that means in a sane world, if he just played like 10% worse, dude, I think they would have been the team that, like, failed to get in the playoffs. They would have been, like, right on that bracket, like fucking Mad Lions were. They would have been in that spot, I feel like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very easy for this team to look significantly worse with just a couple of games going slightly differently, or teams just being able to win with 10k gold advantages. So I don't know. I feel like they've already performed really well. I just don't see how they're going to get better from here. Like, I just don't see what their angle is. Like, unless Hirit just starts becoming Hirit of old and he's able to play things like Jace, like, which he used to be really good at, and, you know, play side lane well and just be up in CS and top lane every now and then, or at least, like, not be getting solo killed. I mean, I think the problem with Hirit is that he's just dying so much generally. Like, he's the type of guy who
dies way too much.
Like 3 or 4 times in lane, he can just die. Like, that's crazy. Like, you can't just be putting up numbers like that. So yeah, I don't know. It's rough for Misfits. I can't really see them doing much here at all.
Dude, that's what I hate about his game, is that unfortunately he looks like he is the type of Korean top laner who is going for that, like the shy type shit of like, I either carry the game or I hit the game. And the problem with that is like, especially in LEC, bro, we go for IWillDominate type top laners where like, depending on the meta, like think about the meta you were just in right now, where actually top wasn't even as important. It was more about AD and mid. You have to be able to sort of survive in those metas, otherwise your team just can't be good. Like in this scenario, yes, if he was last year when he had his picks and he was playing really well, if he was on like Camille or something, yeah, he might carry the whole game. As you say, like these, not only game to game can't I trust him, but he has these games where he'll just die like 9 times in a game, mate, and barely do anything. So, like, if you look at the playoffs, this just shows you where he's at. Right? Yes, Finn is in the playoffs. Okay. That's it. Like, dude, this guy's the worst. Like, this guy is competing with Finn for the worst top player in the playoffs. Like, that's just reality. He probably is the worst, right? It's hard to tell because I'm not really sure where I rank Finn. He probably is the worst, isn't he, out of the 6?
Yeah, I would say here it's the worst. Here it's just the worst top laner in playoffs.
I mean, what do you want?
To be fair, there's a lot of good top laners in
Oh,
playoffs.
there
Right?
is, of course. Yeah.
You have IWillDominate, BB, Wonder. Those are top 3 in my book. This split, and then Alfari like 4. And then
Yeah.
like, could he be better than Finn? Maybe he could like play better in a series than Finn, but was he better than Finn in this split? Hell no.
Yeah, I don't think so either. So yeah, my problem basically of their team is once you get past the amazing Vetio story, it's like there's not that much left. Like as you say, there was Neon. He had. By the way, I also do think I hope that this split has actually made people realize Neon has been on like fucking what, like 3 different teams now or something mental in LEC, and he's always at minimum serviceable. So I hope he isn't just going to keep fucking get moved his whole career because he. By the way, after watching him play in all these different teams, he just should be like. Listen, if Misfits end up being a champion, they'll probably have to sell him, yes. But he should be on a team that's like a borderline playoff team, at least. That is this guy's level. He's just shown it with he's had different supports, different teammates. He's just a good team fighter, mate. Just what you want an ADC to do.
I mean, he's definitely better than people like Flocked right now. Like I would take Neon over Flocked in a heartbeat. But it seems like people always want the rookie hype, you know, like people are always willing to buy into the player that could be the next big AD rather than Neon. But I mean, I would definitely say that. I mean, for example, I would have had him second All Pro. I would have had him second All Pro after Upset. I would have Upset 1, Neon 2. I don't even know who else I could even
comp. I think.
Yeah, I think people had a lot of comp. I think Neon was just better than comp. Generally, I mean, I think comp had really strong like first couple weeks, and then I think he had like some pretty weak performances that ended up getting covered up by his team. Like he had some. I mean, he had like
they're different players for their teams though. Like Neon actually had to straight up carry some team fights occasionally, basically, if it wasn't Vethio. Whereas like to me, comp's more like he just does like the classic ADC. It's just like output consistent damage, play like reasonably safe, just do your job in the team fight. That's it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, if Malrong was having like a nuts like early split, and then you have like Odo who's performing really well first or second, then you have Larson who's probably second.
Can't be the best. Yeah, exactly. I'm with you. Everyone can just be the best off that, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's what people get trapped in. They're like, oh, so everyone is the best.
They do.
It's like, well, no. Like, I mean, I think comp was a big improvement over what you'd expect,
of course,
considering that he had always been on like pretty much like bottom tier teams, like actual bottom tier teams. But yeah, I mean, I probably would have had him third. I think Neon just had too many good games. Like he carried too many games. So
there was even a little detail I saw in the Deficio interview that was on Invent Global, where when he was talking about why they picked Neon, he actually said that they picked Neon really early because he basically, like after the meeting, like Neon obviously knew didn't have much better offers. So he sort of committed early, like, yeah, you're also the team I want to join. And supposedly the reason they targeted him is they wanted specifically, since they were letting Vander go, they wanted the ADC to be a vocal ADC so that in theory then when they brought in someone like Mercer, who's obviously more of a rookie, that in theory like he could sort of lead that guy. Well, if you look at the game, like, dude, if you look at these team fights, I could easily believe Neon's one of the main voices in this fucking squad. It looks like they just called around himself in those fights, and by the way, it worked like a motherfucker. So props to the official if that really is how they recruited. It sounds like they did a very shrewd job of sort of getting what they needed for their team without giving up too much, because there's too many teams in history where, I mean, you could argue maybe Rogue last year was this, like, yeah, you upgraded with Trimby mechanically over Vander, but it seemed like you lost a little bit of whatever Vander brought to your team, you know, sort of synergy, communication, all that jazz.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and I think it actually helps a lot when you're going to go with like a rookie mid a rookie jungle and a rookie support. Like Those
Yes.
are normally the roles that are going to be super vocal. So it feels like that is kind of like where Misfits can falter in terms of like strategy. And that's why sometimes they just get behind so fucking much, because they're just not able to like match the early game polished plays from other teams. But once it gets to team fighting, it feels like Neon knows like how much damage he can output and what needs to be done in order for him to deal damage, where I think a lot of AD carries don't really know. Like, you know, like if the jungle and the support are the ones that are calling fights late game, I feel like sometimes it kind of starts looking like G2 fights, where it's like they're going in and they're like, okay, can we go here? And it's like, you need the AD carry that's going to be like, no, we can't fight in this location.
Yes.
Like, I need like vision here. I need a ward over here. And I need to be standing like this. And like, you need to be marking this guy on the flank, because if he flanks me, I'm fucking dead. Like, you need those types of AD carries that are able to like visualize the whole fight before it happens in order to actually proficiently fight them. And I think that that's something that Neon is really good at. And obviously it's a core strength to champions that he's really good at. So like Aphelios and Jinx were his two best champions. They were the two best champions in the meta, and those champions have no escapes. So they need people to actually play around them, and they need to be able to recognize how fights are going to play out beforehand. And I think that this actually is something that, from what I've heard, Mersa is pretty good at for support. So I think that that also supplements
Right.
like some of the deficiencies in the team, where normally I feel like supports are not as great at understanding the game in the super late game as, you know, other roles, because I mean, it's just hard to understand how much
Yeah,
damage output your carries have and all those types of things. But it feels like Mersa is honestly pretty good at that as well. So maybe I'm not going to give all the credit to Neon, but I definitely think that that's something that is strong by him. And you can tell that he knows what's going on in a fight. He knows where people are before the fight, where other AD carries don't. You know, like you see a fight start for Karzi and he's just like dead instantly. It's like, okay, you didn't see that shit happen. Like, you didn't know what the fuck was going on here. Like, you just died in 1 second, man. Like you didn't even react with any of your summoners or anything. So Neon definitely has that quality that is solid.
Yeah, an interesting detail along those lines from the same interview was that when DeFischer was talking about Mercer, he said that actually they brought in Vander and Mercer pre-season, and they sort of let them try out, and that they picked Mercer. And the reason he said why is because apparently in the pre-season, he said the support pool of champions was crazy, and people were playing like 15 different things, but that Mercer had like adapted to all of them. Right? That to me, dude, if I translate that, right, he didn't really just get amazing at 15 different champions. What that implies to me is he just must have a good mind for like the distinct identities of the champions, and as a result, what you do differently with them. Because I've seen a lot of players in League, even pro players, where their problem is they're really good at the game, but they play like champions in a similar fashion, even if the champion kit is totally different. The classic example, even people like Illisang. You put them on the wrong ones, self-made, you put them on the wrong champion, they'll play it like it was their favoured champion and just do fuck all in the game sometimes. So fair play. Maybe this guy just has a good mindset for what the different roles are supposed to do, how they interact. Right, here's the thing. I want to go to XL now, Dom, but I've got an angle that's interesting for you. Because on the one hand, unfortunately, XL doesn't really have any sexy storyline for this playoffs. Like even Vitality has, well, they've got Perks, they've got Alfari, wow, they have to prove so much, you know, they have all that. XLs, like we said, they could actually just lose every match. It's not even like that's a diss. Like, you did your job, you made it through, get better in summer. Right, so I'm trying to think of angles that are interesting. Here's the problem I have. On the one hand, if I had to go for some like weird angle, they do. If you look at all the jungles and supports in the playoffs, theirs is actually sort of sleeper better than you initially realised. Like, as you say, Marcoon's had a pretty decent split, especially on his champions, he was good. And Mickey X actually has looked pretty good since he joined, sort of helped turn the team around. The problem they have is this. That's great, but at the end of the day, you do also have to have firepower to win the game. And my problem is this, dude. The best player of the laners is clearly Patrick. And mate, isn't he just going to get completely fucked by A, no jinx, just ban that immediately, and B, I looked this up. Dude, he isn't a Kai'Sa player. He's only played Kai'Sa 12 times. He's only won it 3 times. That's his whole career. This might be brutal for XL. This might be a brutal playoff run, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I think so it's weird because I think that Vitality will win, but I think that Vitality's worst series might be against XL, similarly to how Fnatic's worst series was actually in the first round Fnatic's worst series, in my opinion, last split was against Vitality in the first round before they went on that huge run.
That was the ultimate coin flip series, if no one saw it. Like, anyone could have won that.
Yeah, exactly. People forget that it went to 5 games, and then, you know, Fnatic didn't just look like the second best team in the playoffs.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I mean, when I look at this series, I feel like XL just might benefit from the fact that they do really have nothing to lose. Like they're really playing with house money here. So
yes.
I wonder if they're going to pull out anything that's really interesting. I mean, Nuke Duck is normally the type of guy that just has, the crazy ideas. There might be something that he's onto.
Is there
In the
any
mid
weird
lane.
shit in mid that's coming in? Because, like you say, he nearly always does try to pioneer, like, the fringe pick, like, and something like a fucking,
Um,
like the sauna pick or whatever the fuck he did earlier. Is there anything that you can see on the fringes that might come in?
so I think AD mids are coming back. So like maybe like on the fringes,
You
it
think he
could
might pull out
be.
like Zed or some shit? Is there anything like that?
I think there could be like a random Zed, but that's like very specific in the matchup. I
Sure.
would say like maybe a Tristana mid is something I think could
There you
be
go. Okay.
interesting. Like
That's
I
pretty,
think
by the
that
way, that's a pretty good champ. You've been watching LCS. What a pretty good scaling champ. Can do a lot in team fights. Yeah.
yeah. So I think that there's some interesting things that they could be doing there. Especially if like you're willing to play AP bot laners. Like
I
if
know
Jinx is
back in the
banned,
day, he definitely played some Yasuo games. So maybe there's a possibility for that as well.
yeah, Yasuo Diana could be something that they could play. So I think that there's some interesting things that could be pulled out. I mean, what I would hate to see is them just go into the playoffs and play like Victor and Corki
Yes.
and like nerfed Corki and nerfed Victor. Or I guess Victor is not super nerfed, I don't believe. But I mean, just these types of boring champions and sitting
Yeah,
there
yeah.
scale and then just get like their face beat in later on. I want to see something spicy out of Nuke Dog because I feel like that's the only way that this team actually has like some advantages. I mean, obviously, if a team early picks Aatrox like they did, like Mad Lions did against XL, yeah, you have the Finn Kled, like you have those types of picks. I think the problem is that like if Alfari just sticks to like his champions and he's just playing champions like GP and Gnar and all this stuff. I mean, even if Finn gets a counter pick Aurelia or whatever, I don't expect him to actually do super well. Like Jace for Alfari, these types of things. I feel like this is going to be a really tough matchup for him.
By the way, I've got a question along those lines. I'm always interested, like in philosophy in the draft, what you actually think makes the most sense. So I'll give you an example. Obviously, I mean, he even had a game this split. Everyone knows like Kled is like the fucking signature favorite champion of Finn, right? If it's a case like that though, Dom, where it's not that it's a really strong meta champion, it's just one that he specifically picks. When is it actually worth wasting a ban on that? Do you just ban it in the sense that, like you say, you don't think he's good on the meta champion? Is that not a waste of a ban sometimes in the phase?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a waste of the ban almost every time for Vitality because I think Alfari's a strong enough laner. Like the problem is that Kled doesn't counter that much stuff that's in the meta right now. Like,
Right.
what is Kled gonna actually play into that you're happy to play into, right? Like, I mean, if you play against, I'm thinking about all the Alfari champions. I mean, you don't want to be playing Kled versus Jace. Maybe if you have some draft where you're like gonna fucking camp the shit out of top lane, maybe you could do that where you have like a Rise and plus a ganking jungler and you just try to gank top all the time. But like, I just think that Kled is not it. I think that Aurelia could be a good use of a ban because Aurelia does well into Gnar, and I feel like Gnar is just one of the picks that Alfari is just much better on than most
Yes.
people. It just seems like he can get lane advantages with that champion that most people can't. Like if you
Yes.
look at most Gnar players, they're just even in CS, but when Alfari plays Gnar, he's like up 20, 30 CS. It just looks like he has a ton of pressure in the side lane. So I don't think we'll see Kled out of him in this playoffs. I just don't know what he would actually pick it into out of Alfari's champions. Maybe the Renekton is something that Alfari likes to play, and like Kled doesn't win that matchup, but like it's one of those things where if you get a gank at the right time and Kled gets an early kill, Kled can like get an advantage there. But outside of that, I mean, I just don't think that it will come in much. I mean, you don't want to be playing it into like a really good GP player. You don't want to be playing it into a really good Gnar player, any of this. So I think that one's going to be hard. I think, yeah, if I was going to expect a spicy pick out of Finn, I guess it would just be the Aurelia.
And when you said earlier about the potential like jungle shifts, how would that affect Marcoon? I don't know if you didn't name check him, did you?
So I think it's interesting, but I actually feel like his champions will work well. I mean, when he came into LEC in summer, one of last year, one of the things that he was really good at was the Volibear.
Yes.
And that seems to be like coming back with heavy prio. So I think that will work really well. Like going from like playing Xin to Volibear, I think is fine. I think him playing Hecarim would be fine. I'm not sure if I would trust him the most on a champion like Viego. It seems like he's more like he's better at just like the bruiser style, like showing up to objectives at the right points, like making the intelligent plays with his lane prio, like stacking drakes, things like that. So I think that with like the small jungle meta shift, because jungle hasn't shifted too much, I think it'll be fine. But yeah, I don't think that XL has the tools to like have any draft advantages outside of potentially mid lane. So maybe like they run something like a Kaisa Tristana where they complement their damage like that, or they're running some type of like AP bot laner like Ziggs, which we saw a little bit of in LCK today actually from Duck Dom as an interesting pick that you can pick if you're looking to run an 80 mid. So yeah.
What about this? Well, maybe we'll make this the last topic, right? Pick a player, and if this player overperforms, it changes the whole team dynamic of how their team does. So just someone to look for. Like this is, you're not expecting it, but if this happens, this team could do way better. Who's coming to mind if you think of someone like that?
From Excel?
Could be from anyone in the playoffs that you want.
Ooh.
What would make the most drastic difference, do you think? Obviously, it can't be a ridiculous. Like it can't be like Finn is the best player. Like I'm talking about, they just do like slightly better than you expect. Like, but within like the plausible bounds of their character, obviously.
Carzzy.
Okay.
I think Carzzy is somebody who's had a really fucking bad split. Like I think that he this is probably the worst split of his entire career, and he was just looking lost. But I think that if he just starts playing like well, like I mean, I'm not saying he has to be better than Upset, but like if he just starts playing well, I mean, I could easily see him being, for example, the second best AD carry in this entire playoffs, right? So that's the player that I want to see step up kind of the most here is Carzzy. I want to see him really take advantage of meta shifts and things like that.
The problem is when I look at it, I think this is what's wild about these playoffs. There's a lot of teams, like for example in Misfits, it doesn't even matter, dude. It doesn't matter who else I pick. I don't think they actually win, even if any of these players play their best, except Vethio. So the problem is, I actually think I'll just take a different I'll take Selfmade. I actually think you could take another player because to me, if Selfmade plays, he doesn't even have to be the best jungler in the playoffs, but if he just plays a consistent game, then you've got a chance, in my opinion. Because another factor I feel like must be so fucked in their team, maybe we'll make this the last topic, because I want to get your thoughts on this, is it's all well and good having like really good solo laners, like, oh, we all like each other and all that crap, right? But the problem I have is if I don't know game to game how my jungler's going to play, or even if he's going to have any agency in the game, it's going to be very hard to have a game plan as a laner. Like, I don't really, like, I'm just at the whim of the game at this point in time, and the problem I have with Selfmade is I have a really hard time guessing when he's going to have these bad games as well. They just seem to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think for him, the thing that I think Selfmade struggles with is being able to predict what the enemy could do to fuck him. So like when like support roams on him, or if like the enemy like does a late invade or something like that, I feel like
he does seem to be the victim of a lot of early invades that fuck his game up, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, he's the type of guy that will get punished pretty hard from that. So generally, I think that with this, like, this is something that coaching staff can help out with a lot, like these early game plans, because I think that you just need to make sure that Selfmade gets like even early starts so he can play the game, because he's the type of guy that like will see the gank opportunities and he'll like understand how to get really strong and snowball himself if the game is looking normal. But if things are different and like it's like, okay, so their support's moving, my support's not moving, like he's not going to be able to react to those properly. Like that's just when he's at his worst. So hopefully they're able to identify some of these key issues that are happening and correct them, and just have level ones where you just drop a couple wards early. Just drop a couple early wards for him to make sure that he knows what's fucking going on, so he doesn't get completely fucked in the early game.
Well, on the best damn league show period, all the teams aren't special. They all aren't really good, and everyone isn't equally likely to win. Some teams are shit, some teams are really good, and some teams are vitality. You figure out what that means on the next episode of the best damn league show period. Whatever. Roll the credits.